Well, hello everyone and welcome. I'm Stewart Mennin and I'm speaking to you from Sao Paulo. And this is the Anatomy of Wicked Problems, Patterns in the Health Professions. And I want to say that this is being brought to you free, courtesy of AMEE. I want to thank Ron Harlan, Pat Lilly, and especially Claire McRae in the AMEE office who is producing this presentation today. This is the second webinar in a series, and I'm very glad that you're here. And this webinar is being recorded, and it will be freely available should you want to use it. And you have a choice about your participation. If you don't mind your name and your image being in the recording, then do nothing. However, if you do not wish to be identified, either by name or picture, some people may be watching at work and don't want to be seen to be watching at work, then you can change your name in the participant space by hovering your cursor over the bottom where it says participants, over your name, and you can change your name. Is that right, Claire? Okay, if you have any problems with that or questions, write it in the chat space. And the chat space, you can open the chat space at the bottom and we'll be interacting in that space. So that takes care of that. Now, I have a disclaimer to make. I have to, in the interest of ethics, that these blogs and these webinars are free and open to all, and will stay so. And I also teach an 8-week online essential skills in action course in April and May in collaboration with AMEE and the Human Dynamics Institute. And we go in much deeper detail and you get to work on your own issues. And I also teach ASME at the AMEE Congress. And so I make part of my living teaching these 2 courses for AMEE. I do other work as well. So this is a disclaimer. This webinar and this broadcast are free and they're related, but they're not part of how I make my living directly. So disclaimer. So if you could, each of you, if you have not already done so, write your name, write where you are in the world in the chat space. So Erica Smith is in Ireland, Kathleen is in London. So just write hello everybody from, hi Gustavo, good to see you again. And Mohammed. So just put your name in and where in the world you are. It's nice to see that we have an international audience. So today, we're going to explore a really important aspect of wicked problems. Today, we're going to look at the anatomy of wicked problems and talk about what are wicked problems. And to do that, one of the things I've learned in these broadcasts is it's much better to have a working example. Hi, Devinder, good to hear from you. So I'm going to use small group learning, small group research, teamwork, clinical teams. I'm going to use, as you see on the screen, I'm going to go to annotate and open up a drawing. As you see, we're going to use here, I'm going to use a small group of learners. And it's a wicked problem because what we're going to do today is look at what are wicked problems. How can we identify a wicked problem and give it a name? And when you identify a wicked problem, then you can see it as a pattern. And then you can break out of the box of paradigms that keep you in a line. You can get into wicked problems that have actually ways to work with them. And so what makes your wicked problem important to you and to your workmates, your team, students? So we work across multiple levels, and we'll look at what options you have to shift the patterns and what you can do next. And this is the plan for today. We're going to go through this today. And we'll begin with what are wicked problems. And wicked problems are any situation that causes difficulties for which there are no obvious, available, and known solutions. So immediately you can think how many wicked problems you have. Any problem that's extremely intractable, that means refractory to solutions, is massively entangled and complex. So I would posit that most of life is wicked problems, and very little of it is tame, that is, under control. We try very hard to keep things under control, but in fact, most of it is wicked. Now, I also want to make a point before I go any further that there's a chat space that's open to everyone, and that it's completely acceptable, and I really like it when people write in the chat during the presentation, and I will pause periodically and look and see what's in the chat. So if you have thoughts, comments, questions, ideas, write them in the chat space. We're going to come and look at them. And it's a good place to carry on a dialogue with each other. You don't necessarily have to be with me. You can say, oh, Devinder, I have a certain idea. How about this? What do you think about that? And so on. So use the chat space, please. I know you're not used to it, but it's a good thing to get used to. So wicked problems are any situation. So look at this group. Do you think this group has wicked problems? If they're working on a case or a problem or a patient or a difficult situation, they don't know the answer. They're going to try to work it out. They can't pull a book out and say, okay, this is a solution, this is a formula, we just plug it in, 1, 2, 3, and we go. They have to figure it out. There's so many factors going on in a group at one time that they can't break it down to a single factor. So working in a group, working in a team, working in a committee, there are common characteristics of a wicked problem. A wicked problem in this group is defined differently. Each person in this group will define the wicked problem differently. There's no two people that see it the same way. So in this wicked group, take this color to, in this wicked group, each person is going to see this differently, and nobody is going to see it the same, and they're all correct. And each person comes from a history and a background, so they have their own context. And the meaning they make fits into their own context. So each person makes a meaning from their own context. And then there's the context that's shared, but seen differently by everybody. So it's interesting. So a wicked problem could be context dependent. That is, it fits into a specific context, but it generalizes across context. Let me give an example. I'm going to watch 5 different groups work today, small groups working in problem-based learning. And each group is going to have its own context. Each group is going to have its own context. And I'm going to watch each group work. They'll all appear to work on a problem. They'll all work together in some way, and that will all be familiar. But the context will be different in each one. So they'll all have a similar process, but the context will be different. So you can observe phenomena generally at a higher level than deeper at a contextual level. And then these problems have no solution. You can't solve them unless you work on them. So solving a wicked problem means working on it. So I hope it's clear that a wicked problem is defined differently. So if you're on a committee, a curriculum committee or an assessment committee, every single person in that committee has a different view of the curriculum and the assessment, or what should be done in the department. And they all see the context differently. And a lot of medical educators, I was reading some literature yesterday, they talk about the inability to move from one context to another. Well, it's not a surprise because contexts are specific. What moves from one to the other is the general nature of the interaction. I'm going to show the anatomy of this in just a minute. So, to move forward here. Please, if questions arise, please do this. So, when you look at a wicked problem like small group learning or teamwork or clinical teamwork or community teamwork, what you see is a pattern that's not fixed in time. It's not frozen like a photograph. It's moving as people talk, as people exchange, as ideas come up and go down. It's fluid. And what we really observe is that wicked problems are patterns. They're not fixed things. They're dynamical. They change in time and space. A wicked problem in a curriculum committee is not the same at the beginning of the meeting as it is by the end of the meeting. It's changed. And by the next meeting of the committee, it's changed again, and so on and so on. So it keeps moving, it keeps changing. So how could we look at a wicked problem as a pattern? We need a definition of pattern or wicked problem. And we could say that a wicked problem is a pattern, and that patterns are similarities, differences, and connections that have meaning over space and time. Let me walk through this. Similarities, let's look at this picture of students. Let's see, these students are all roughly similar in age. They're all in the same class, they're all in the same group, or maybe they're working in the same clinic. They have similarities that keep them together. That what keeps them around this table is probably this problem that they're working on. They have a shared interest that acts like glue, like an interstitium in a tissue that holds, like the stroma that holds the parenchyma in place. It's a glue, it's a cohesion. So similarities are cohesive, they keep people together. And differences in the group, each person has a different talent and a different experience, and they can bring that experience and that talent into the group. So each person has a unique contribution, and you want to hear from everybody. So the differences give you potential for variety, potential for solutions that you hadn't thought of. And you have to make connections to take advantage of similarities and differences. And that moves over time and space. And so a pattern, like a small group in action, if you're observing a small group in action, you'll see similarities between them, differences, and connections. And you'll see that happen in and out over time. Let's say you're watching a resident that you're evaluating for entrustable professional activities. Or let's say you're observing a mini CEX, a mini clinical exam, or you're doing a direct observation in postgraduate. What you're looking for is patterns. You're not looking for a single instance. A single instance would be on a checklist, but an observation is a global checklist. You're looking for generalities, and there should be, what are the similarities that I see? What are the differences that have potential to move this system? And how are they connected? So this is a very, very important statement. It comes from Glenda Oyoung and Royce Holliday at the Human Systems Dynamic Institute. So if patterns and wicked problems are the same, then what's the anatomy of a wicked problem? Anatomy, for me, I'm an anatomist. I was trained in anatomy. I have a PhD in anatomy. So I'm stuck with this anatomy stuff. And so anatomy for me is living architecture. It's not something dead and frozen and fixed. You look at the tissue that may be preserved in order to get an idea of living architecture. And living architecture is functional. So structure and function form a pattern. Muscles have patterns, people's organs have patterns, people have patterns, society has patterns. And you recognize patterns as complex. That is, you recognize a pattern and you see it moving over time, and you can't hold it. You can't freeze it in time. You can't just say, stop, that's the pattern, don't ever move again. Because the patterns you're looking at that are wicked are moving. They're alive, they're running all the time. And there's an underlying structure. Each pattern may have a context, but the structure that creates the pattern is generic. So I want to pause here for a minute and ask Claire what she's seeing in the chat space and what questions and comments are coming up. Claire, you can unmute your mic.
So just one thing at the moment, I think, Stuart, somebody's talking about their curriculum review. So they've just had a change of administration, and curriculum's been running for the last 10 years, and the new administration now wants to change it. And from what I'm reading, it sounds like they want to go back. And I think that's probably a really good example of one of these patterns over time, where 10 years ago, almost exactly the same thing happened, and 10 years later, we're doing it again, but slightly differently.
Well, it's a really good example. Curriculum change is the most common example used in medical education, or assessment change. And the biggest issue people deal with is resistance to change. That is, people who don't want to do it. And the biggest battles are between the people who want to do it and the people who don't want to do it. And that's a pattern in itself, the pattern of conflict, of difference. The difference has to be reduced so that you take advantage of the cohesion between people and work things out. I'm going to talk more specifically of how to deal with this difference, because one of the things I've learned, I've worked with this 40 years, 42 years actually, and change, it cannot be achieved by persuasion or even by evidence. Because if the person on the receiving end of the evidence or the change or the argument, the receiving end of it, doesn't believe in it subjectively, it doesn't matter what the objective evidence is. And people have to accept it and believe it in a way that's meaningful to them. And if that doesn't happen, evidence is not always going to work. You just have to reflect on your life to see how true that is. So how do we recognize a pattern? If you're going to argue about something, you need to argue about the same thing. Very often people will be discussing something about a curriculum without really being able to talk about it. So let's take this small group, and we could say that each person is a department. But let's take a small group, case-based learning in a curriculum. And it's very common that there's inconsistencies among group members from time to time, or between students and teachers from time to time. Or if you have 12 groups working at the same time in a curriculum, that they're not all the same. This is a very common problem. And for me, it depends on how far out they are, but generally it's okay. So how does one look at a problem like curriculum change, like Claire brought up from the discussion group? Well, we've had this curriculum for 10 years. It's been a pattern, and now we want to change the pattern. We want to go back to a previous pattern, but not fully. We want some of the previous, some of the old, some of this, some of that. And not everybody agrees. So how should we identify this problem? So you can take any wicked problem and identify it with the following 5 questions. The first one is to make a generalization. So in general, what do I notice about this group? Okay, so a generalization is something like this, something like, in general, I notice. So it's a big, faraway look. It's a panorama. In general, I notice that this school has a curriculum that's been in place for a long time. And in general, I notice there are some people now beginning to make waves about changing it, and it's disruptive. Or in general, what I notice about this small group is that students are actively engaged with and inquiring about learning. So this group up here, I notice they're generally engaged and inquiring and active about learning. That's what I observe generally. And let me see. And then in general, I notice this, except this approach to learning works well, but still some students prefer to learn in lectures or by themselves. So not everything is the same. Some people prefer to change the curriculum, except other people don't want to change the curriculum. Where is the contradiction? So generalization and exception allow you to identify where the tension is in the system. The tension in the curriculum is between people who are actively engaged in the old curriculum and those who want to change the new curriculum. There's a contradiction in the sense that on one hand, some students and teachers in the small group dominate the discussions. It's clear. And quieter individuals still make meaningful contributions and learned well. And also in some discussions, at some times, Those who are dominant at other times become quiet. So on one hand, dominant people can be strong in a particular subject, but in another subject they can be quiet. So that's a contradiction in a way. So generalization, exception, contradiction, and surprise. I love surprise in this sense. I was surprised by watching groups, the large variability in small group teaching skills. As I watch 6, 7 different tutorials or groups or clinical teams, I'm amazed at the variability of teaching skills of the people involved. No two people do the same thing. The variability is quite high, and still students learn either because of it or in spite of it. And one more, and then we'll stop for questions and comments. And I'm puzzled. I wonder, this is really important. You have to be able to sit back and wonder without judgment. I wonder, how is curiosity sustained by individuals and by groups? As this group goes on over weeks and weeks, how do they sustain curiosity? I wonder about that. So look, in general, I notice students, with some students do and some students don't. On one hand, they do this, on the other hand, they do that, and I'm surprised. This is my bias, I'm surprised, and I wonder. Now, if you take a curriculum change, in general, the exceptions, the contradictions, the surprise and wonder, you can easily shape the nature of that wicked problem right there. You have the qualities of the wicked problem. So I want to pause there and ask, what questions do you have about this or anything so far? Claire, what's showing up in this space?
So we've got some more examples here of wicked problems, and probably some good examples of the kinds of contradictions that we're having, and also maybe how difficult it is to generalize. So we've got one change where the current system has been embedded for 72 years and now it suddenly has to be changed to a different one. But then at the opposite extreme, we've got Tim talking about professionalism, where there is no definition. The ground is shifting underneath you as you're trying to do something about it. And then we've got some comments. So Devinda says one of the big problems with this is that these are uncertain and complex, but we're trying to deal with them as if they're really simple, straightforward problems with a right answer. And you know, this difference, that something that means something to one person doesn't mean the same thing, and how can we get people acting together? And Kathleen has just added that sometimes when you've got a problem, it can sound like you're making a judgment and that people are wrong, you're right. And I think that's what I'm getting out of that statement there.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. The idea of making a statement is often, if I say, this is a terrific webinar, then people can disagree with me or agree with me. If I say, I wonder what makes this webinar useful, then there's less conflict. So when you want to create conflict, make a statement. When you want to create cohesion, ask a question that's genuinely curious, and then people can come around it. And let's see, who was it? 72 years. Who was it said that? Intag? 72 years, what it means is that your school is coming out of the 19th century into the 20th century, and some people want to go to the 21st century. So 72 years is a stainless steel curriculum. You can't dent it, you can't put a scratch in it, it's going to really be hard. So my comments would be, it's much easier to make small changes and consistently make them than it is to change the whole thing all at once. And this is something with a lot of experience behind it. I'm going to now talk about how this happens, how change happens, whether it's an ethics committee or professionalism or curriculum. Mustafa talks about the second year of applying integrated medical curriculum with small groups. And he's got exactly the problem I'm using in this webinar. So let's see what happens. So we've spotted a wicked problem. We've identified it, and we can name it as uncertainty in group learning. Inconsistently uncertainty in group learning. So what is the anatomy of this group learning? Let's take each individual and give them a geometric shape, because we're going to make a model. So each person is one of these models, and they talk to each other. Okay, this is the idea of group work. They talk to each other. Or perhaps we can say that these are departments. This is OB-GYN, this is microbiology, this is medicine, this is surgery, this is pathology, this is anatomy. It doesn't matter. So maybe these lines are broken. Maybe they don't talk to each other so much. And maybe that's one of the issues. Or let's say this is a community, and this is a community clinic, and that the community clinic doesn't really talk to the hospital enough, or that the municipal clinic doesn't really stay in touch with the regional clinic, or that the students that are put in really don't have any impact back, and so on. So you can see that when you have multiple players interacting together, this is what you would see in context. This is your context. Can't write like this. Got to get one of these pens. So this is context, local context. What happens if these students will interact in a small group and talk and talk and talk until, as a result of all their discussions, a shared idea emerges. Something comes out of this. And what we call this then is, let me take these lines off. So they talk, they talk, they talk. The agents or the people or the departments or the schools or the communities interact, and something emerges from these discussions that's bigger than the learning objectives that come to this group, or the clinical decisions that they arrive at don't come from a single person. They come from the collective exchange between people. It's the interactions that lead to the pattern of action they're going to take, the options they're going to have. So these circles at the top represent a new structure, new anatomical structure, if you will, that emerges from the interaction. What's new in this case are the learning objectives. The learning objectives. It could be in a curriculum, what's new is the sequence or the integration of different things. So what happens is that in massively large, entangled systems like a medical school or like groups, you can't account for all the different things. It's not possible to add them up. They don't add, they multiply. They're nonlinear. And so they come together and they create something. Just like, I'll give you a musical example. When you go to see a concert, the musicians are all tuning up individually. You can hear them all tuning up. When the conductor taps on the podium and lifts his baton and starts, the music emerges as a complete whole. It's not the sum of every instrument. It's a whole. So when these people get together and interact, they reach a place where the tension within the group is released and a new whole comes out. So a new curriculum plan emerges. A group set of learning objectives emerges. A diagnosis emerges. A collective decision for action emerges. In wicked problems, what happens collectively is at the system-wide level. Patterns are system-wide, and they come from the interactions of the individuals. I'm going to pause there and ask for any questions or clarifications. This is a very important point. When you propose a new curriculum, you're trying to achieve a new pattern. A very common mistake is for a dean or a director to come in and push a pattern down from top onto the people below. It doesn't work. It fails every time. So, Claire, are you seeing anything that would fit in this description here of people working together and a pattern emerging from their interactions?
I think just what Mustafa was, I was thinking, he doesn't specifically mention people acting together, but they actually just started doing it. And despite all the resistance, now it's running. The thing happened because they started it, if you see what I mean.
Right. That's important what Mustafa says. The thing is happening and it's running, but it doesn't necessarily say here that it's good or it's bad. There's no value to what emerges. The value, good or bad, is applied after the thing emerges and you see it. In other words, something new happens and you look at it and you say, oh, I like that, it's good. Or you look at it and you say, oh, I don't like that, it's not good. But that happens after it shows up. The new curriculum, the new thought, the new learning issues, the new objectives come out of the group discussion first, and then the values are attached to it. So when we talk about this, we talk about being fit, that what emerges from whatever these circles are fits the tension that holds these things in place. I'm going to talk in more detail in the next webinar about this. So whatever emerges fits. It's not the most fit, it's not the least fit, it's excellent enough. It's excellent enough. And so the group then is influenced subsequently by whatever emerged. So for example, let's take an example. The group interaction yields an agreement that we're going to change the way we evaluate next time. And so when we get together, we have a new evaluation plan. And that new evaluation plan influences the way we work the next time we get together. And so the group is different the next time it implements its evaluation plan. And because of that, new things emerge, and those new things then influence the group. And this is what group learning looks like. It's interaction that leads to a shared idea at a system-wide level. Let me make this a little clearer if I can. This is a system-wide level. What's a system? A system is any collection of things that share commonality, period. We now have a system of people on this call. We all share this live webinar. We're a system. We're the adaptive action webinar system, whatever you want to call it. The pattern that emerges collectively in each of your minds and in the web space, the chat space, emerges from your thinking and my discussion. And the ideas in your head emerge here. And those ideas influence what you hear in subsequent discussion. So that complex learning and complex adaptive systems are iterative. And the idea that you have emerges at a system-wide level in your brain, across neurons. It's not neuron specific, it's groups of neurons. So I want to pause here and ask, what questions do you have about this idea of local context and exchange leading to system-wide new structure that then influences subsequent action? This is the heart of the issue, and I want to know, let's see. And well, I will come to measurement, Omaima. This really gets to a significant point about measurement, because you can measure the degree of cooperation, the number of agents, what holds them together. You could measure what emerges and the influence of what emerges back on the system. It's a very effective way to go about measuring things. Let's see, microphones are off at this point. Okay. For curriculum change, having diverse opinions does help, particularly including students. Yes. I will tell you that diversity is the secret, that whenever you become clonal, monochromatic, mono-dictator, whatever it is, that the system is not healthy, that there really needs diversity to be healthy. So I want to move on and talk about what we can do. What can we actually do to work a system like this? How can we, let me see if I can do this. How can we examine what we have, look at the agents, the people involved, and how they interact, notice and observe what emerges at a system-wide level, and see how it fits, and then how it influences function again. The way we do that, here's our group in the middle. The way we do that is by a system called adaptive action. Adaptive action is a method of inquiry that keeps learning going, okay? So adaptive action is 3 questions: what, so what, now what? And as long as you ask these 3 questions, you're going to be fine, no matter what you do. If you skip this one, if you don't ask so what, you can't really do anything in a complex system. A complex system absolutely requires that you do the so what, make meaning. So what, now what? A major mistake on part of students, teachers, residents, programs is to go, okay, we have this problem, let's do this. They go, what, now what? They immediately go from what to now what, without any discussion of meaning at multiple levels, and it fails, and it costs a lot of money. So what I want to say is that you have to go through so what. Let me take you through these 3 questions, because these 3 questions will work for diagnosis, they work for research, they work for program implementation, they work for program evaluation, they work for all contexts, across all levels, magnitudes, and across time and space. This is the generic approach to complex problems that allows you context, specificity, and generic process. Medical education has been struggling for decades to deal with context, specificity, and generality. A lot of people have written about this, and a lot of people have failed to make sense out of it. Here is what I believe does the job. It's working in complexity with these questions. Let me illustrate in detail. Take each question at a time. So let's go back to our small group. We have our small group here. And what do you want to know? Well, we have a problem. What is the problem? Well, we need a discovery process. We need to discover what's going on. We need to ask questions, get some information. We want to describe what we see. I see a woman who looks pale and is slightly confused and shaking a little bit. Okay. What patterns do you see? Well, she looks okay to me, except she's pale. That's a pattern. And a pale pattern immediately brings you to microcirculation and circulatory issues, either vascular problems or nutritional, metabolic problems or neurological. It immediately suggests things. So by looking at patterns, you begin to move in a particular way. What patterns do you think need to shift? Well, this woman needs better color in her skin, vasodilation, vasoconstriction. What, and then all these questions appear. What patterns do you want to keep? What's the story, the history? What are the forces at work? What is the diversity? What? You can read for yourself. There's a lot of what questions, and all of these have to do with discovery of what you're seeing. So what are you seeing? When I taught anatomy, we used to put x-rays up in the gross anatomy lab. I'd put up an x-ray and I'd say to the students, what do you see? And the students would start talking about illnesses and diagnoses, and I would say, no, you see gray and you see white and you see black. You see patterns of gray, white, and black, and how do those, and so first, what do you see? Okay, what? It's very important that you, these questions are really useful, and you don't have to use them all. You can use 1, you can use 2, you can use 3, but this should be the repertoire of a teacher working in a group or a clinician. So once you describe everything, you've discovered everything, then you want to understand it. You want to make meaning from it. And making meaning is really the human stuff. So what is about making meaning. So what does it mean that this group came up with these learning objectives or got this discussion going in a particular place? So what is understanding. So the first part is description. The second part is understanding, explaining sources, interdependencies, implications, patterns. Explanation is not the same as description. This is a philosophical issue. I don't want to get into dialectics here, but explanation is a statement of understanding. Description is what you see. I may not understand it, but I can describe it. So what are the tensions? And now why would I say, what are the tensions? When I see difference, what I'm really talking about is tension and energy. Because difference are two states of energy. A black line on a white space is a difference. So what is important in this group? What's important in this webinar? What's important to you right now? That's the difference that makes the difference. As Claire is listening to this, she's thinking, what's important that I say when Stewart asks me, what do I see in the chat space? So she's looking for the difference that makes a difference. You're looking for the difference that makes a difference in your learning. You're looking for the difference that will make a difference for your understanding in this talk. So what's important becomes a critical question. And then there's other questions. So what is working for you? So what does that mean that that's working for you? What are the implications for what I'm doing that that's working for me? So what's likely to change and what was likely to not change? What options? This one is really important too. So what options do I have? You don't have to take them. You just, well, I can turn this off. I can mute myself. I can leave. I can listen to the recording. I can talk about it with someone else. I don't have to do anything. I just cruise on to the end. When you have all those options, the options come out of meaning. The options come out of understanding. So that when you choose an option for action, you've actually chosen something that you've described, understood, and now want to act on. And so the third part of adaptive action is, now what will you do? This little cycle is just rock solid. What do I see? What's going on? What's the data? So what does it mean for me? I'll expand this now. What does it mean for you listening? What does it mean for the group at your school that might be listening together? What does it mean for your department? What does it mean for the students in your school? So what does it mean for the new curriculum? Now, of all the options that we have, let's choose one and see what happens. So now what? Now what action will we take? Now what will you do? And it means now. It doesn't mean next week, next month. It means now. And this is hard for people because they have to commit themselves. Well, now, what I want to do is talk to the committee about what I've learned here today. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a call and set up an appointment to talk to the committee. That's now. Instead of saying, well, maybe next week I'll make a call. No, now you can write down in your book, make a call next week. You got to do something now. And here are the other questions. Now, what will you communicate? What will you measure? Now, what are the constraints on the system, the expectations? Now, what action? If you think about this, and if you're dealing with chronic disease, the what has a history and the so what is uncertain. So you need to take action and see what happens. Listen, let's try this and let's get back in touch in a week and see how it's going. There's a lot of treatment in medicine that's presumptive. That is, we'll try this and see what happens. And so then we try, the action is now what, and what happens is a new what after the treatment. And the cycle goes around and around iteratively. It never stops. If you want to have a successful curriculum, Itab, in Pakistan, you'll not wait 72 years to make this cycle. If you cycle around your curriculum in everything that you do, you'll see all the bits and pieces that need to be changed as they come up. And so it's really important that you take this cycle and that you roll it, and that you roll it with another one, and that you roll it and keep rolling. This is an iterative process. It never ends. So that this whole thing is moving forward. It's moving all the time. So the constant what, so what, now what, at everybody, on everybody's lips. The students are saying this in their group. The teachers are saying this with the students. The teachers are saying this amongst themselves. The department teachers are saying this about the department. The curriculum committee is talking about this. And so it goes. And so this is really important that this keeps going. This is the main take-home message, that wicked issues are things that don't have easy answers, and they need to be worked with. And they occur as patterns. And patterns can be identified by 5 easy questions, and then you can take action on them using the 3 questions of adaptive action. Why am I telling you this? Why don't I just go outside and enjoy the springtime weather in Sao Paulo? Because progress in science is not simple line leading to the truth. It's more progress away from less adequate conceptions of and interactions with the world. So really important. This comes from Thomas Kuhn. If you haven't read this work, you're missing a huge contribution to your education. This is the 50th anniversary of the structure of scientific revolutions. He was a historian. Progress in science is not, you do this and you get there. It doesn't work that way. And there's no arriving at the truth. There's always somebody with another question, another challenge. And so science is more about progress away from something. So I'll give you an example. In medical education, people started talking about entrustable professional activities, and they left behind psychometric measurements because they didn't fit. You couldn't measure entrustable professional activities with a p-value or a checklist. So we move forward away from what we do into new territory. It's the nature of revolution in science and knowledge. You're moving into uncharted territory. I will give you references, Komora, in just a moment for wicked reading. So adaptive action is both practice, do what the questions I showed you, and theory, because this is, I'm pointing with my finger to the screen. That's great. I love it. So adaptive action, this is what constitutes, what are the pieces, how do they interact, what becomes important, and what emerges. So adaptive action works in multiple situations, and I want you to take this home. Adaptive action works for wicked and simple problems. Even a simple problem, you could ask what, so what, now what. What I'm proposing for all of medical education, everywhere in the world, in all its forms and all health, that we move to what, so what, now what, as a unified way to have inquiry. You can ask this question at the administrative level, in the dean's meeting. You can ask this question at a student meeting. You can ask this question with a patient. You can ask this question with a residents meeting. Omaima, I'll get to you in a second. I'll get to your question in a second about polarity. And so in diagnosis and research and small group work and inquiry, these questions fit. In work for evaluation and assessment, these questions fit. And it works in and across contexts at all times and scales. So we have now been able to combine context and cross context successfully, because we're not transplanting context, we're transplanting process, keeping context specific. So what we've done today, so I want to stop there and have a discussion. before I go on. Mima asks a question, is it right to move away from one pole to the other? Is it better to manage both poles and get the best out of them? Mima, the fact that you have two poles means that you've identified the tension in the system. Resistance to change, adaptation, two poles, okay? You don't go all the way to one pole and you don't go all the way to the other pole. In any given moment, you're here. In another moment, you're here. In another moment, you're here. And what you do is you elastically adapt between the poles at any given moment by using adaptive action. So what makes sense right now? And under these conditions, what makes sense? And under those conditions. So there's no rigidity here, there's plasticity. So you identify the poles, but you don't allow them to freeze you into place. Is that clear, Omaima? It's a very important distinction. And when there are multiple poles, you can't identify. You have to observe what happens at the systemic level. You can't observe what happens at the polar level. Let's see. So, Claire, what are you seeing in the chat space? What am I missing?
I think there was a really nice example, like a single sentence cycle there. Somebody mentioned that the what would be EPAs, and looking at EPAs, the so what was, if we want to put these in, we need to change our curriculum, and then having changed the curriculum, or thinking about changing the curriculum, the now what was, we need to actually decide what we want to get out of this, what are our fundamental goals. So I think that was just a nice little
and once you've decided that, you put it into place, you've changed the what. Because what I now see in the new curriculum is that we have EPAs, and so what does it mean now that we have the EPAs in place? And what are we going to do now? And so you keep going around this circle. What this allows you to do is to avoid the 72 years of Pakistan's problem. When you keep moving around this circle, it's not a lot of work, it's just inquiry. So this circle allows you to stay engaged in what you're doing. By every time you take an action, there's a new what that appears. And you can say, what am I seeing now? So what does that mean? What is similar and different now than was before? And what's important now has changed because something has changed. And based on what I'm seeing now, what options look good to me and to us? And what should we do next? The other thing is, when you ask, so what does this mean? So what does this mean for me, Stewart? So what does this mean for us, everybody online here? So what does this mean for all the people that are not online? So what does this mean for AMEE and for medical education in the world? So what does this mean for global health? So when you ask for meaning at multiple levels, you automatically get out of your fixed context. You can come back down to your context, but the meaning you make crosses contexts. The meaning will be different for the administrators, then it'll be different for the assessment committee, it'll be different for all these people, but they will be making meaning and taking action. And so this is a way to work with wicked problems. Other questions?
Stuart, I actually wondered, there was a question from Chris, and I'm not sure that I have answered it fully. And I wondered if he might want to put his microphone on and maybe explain a bit more what he meant by, do you always have to go through the so what, especially if there's a large resistance? Because to me, that's the most important time to do it, but I might be missing something in the question.
Okay, where's the question? At what time?
1:37 from Chris.
Way back. 9:37 for me. Let's see, hang on a second. I'm getting there. I don't see it. Let's see. You always have to go through the so what. In a complex problem, Chris, yes. Yes. Why? What does so what give you that you need? When you say, so what does it mean for us? It means that we're more on track and that the actions we take represent everyone, and there's more democracy going on here than there otherwise would have been. So what does it mean? When all the meanings are out clearly and you look at the meanings, it suggests to you options to action. So if I say, we're going to put EPA's entrustable professional activities into the curriculum, and what would that mean? Well, that would mean that the teachers have to take a lot more time with the students, and there has to be more space for communication. And if we're going to put EPAs in, and that suggests that one of the options we need to look at is scheduling for time for EPAs. And so an action comes up as a result of a so what. Or another so what could be, well, we're going to have some faculty development if we're going to put EPAs in. So who's going to do the faculty development? Now what are we going to do? So the now what is born in the so what question. It's not born in the what question. This is the fallacy of Cartesian logic. In Cartesian and Newtonian logic, you can go from what to now what because the system is mechanical. There's no interpretation. The system is so low dimensional that it doesn't need a lot of interpretation. It's clear. This piece is broken. Take it out and replace it. So,
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, this is Chris. It's just sometimes some problems seem so intractable that to go through the so what phase actually, even though it gives meaning, seems to actually can become very problematical to some issues that need to just get done. And there's a sense that if you just do it without going through the so what, that's the only way through the dilemma.
And then at the end of doing it, you've got a lot of dissatisfied people.
Yes.
And so you're back where you were before, essentially, just with a different set of conditions. If you do the so what, and you don't have to do it at the huge scale, Chris. So we're stuck here and we have to take an action. So what does that mean, that we're stuck here and we need to take an action? That means that we all agree that this is a critical moment that requires, that this is one of our options. We can delay action, we can take an action. That's an option. We can try it as a pilot experiment, that's an option. We can look at other schools that have done this, that's an option. So you've got 4 options right in front of you, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
And then I will say, which option seems best for your circumstances? You decide that with your colleagues. So you haven't skipped the so what, you've made it richer.
Mm-hmm.
If you only come up with one so what, then you're not doing your job. You need to flesh out the so what, and because scientists only talk about so what after the fact. So what does this experiment mean after they've done it? They don't talk about it so much before the fact. Well, these are the options. In designing an experiment, what's your background, Chris? What's your area of work?
I work in medical education as sort of like professional and personal development with a small team.
So if somebody has to develop a set of skills and abilities to further their career, you don't say, do this, do that, do this, do that, do this. You say, what options do we have for doing this over what period of time and with what kind of persons and what kinds of outcomes should we look for? And what are the options that we have here that work best for you? That's what you do. And then you develop those. What does that mean for me? Okay, this. What does it mean for you as a coach? What does that mean for the department that you're going to engage in these things? What does that mean for other people? My duck tells me I'm out of time. Hang on a second. So what does that mean for you? Okay, so that's the way to go. Chris, you can write to me and we can talk further, but I have to move on because of time. I actually have another call right now. So let me summarize. Today, we explored the structure of a wicked problem that looks like a pattern. We recognized some common features of patterns and wicked problems, that they all Everyone has their own opinion about them. They need to have action taken. And we saw the structure that it's context that emerges into patterns at a system-wide level. And we reviewed the use of adaptive action. Now, someone asked about what to read. Here are things to read. You can read Newton's Dog by Glenda Oyoung. It's very much to this issue. You can get a copy of Adaptive Action by Oyoung and Holiday and read the introduction to get started. I've written 3 blogs about this subject that are available free at this place. You can explore the Human Systems Dynamics website. Here, it's free, especially in the resources. You write any word you're interested in and you get resources. And you can stay tuned for the next blog and webinar in November, in when I'm going to ask Chris, where do wicked problems come from and what can we do about it? So we've looked at the structure of patterns, but how do they arise? And what controls the birth of a wicked problem, and how can we steer it over time? We all have them, but where do they come from and how can we manage them? And then you can follow me on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. I'm not very active, but I'm available all the time. Chris, if you want to discuss this more, just write to me. You have my email? I'll put it in the chat. It should be on the, should be here. Wait, no, it's not. Let me go to the first.
Thank you, I will.
Let me go here. It's here, down at the bottom, right here. Mennin as Gmail. So I'm out of time. I need to stop. And I need to ask, are there any final questions or comments that you want to add or ask before we sign off? Where's Tim's question then? Do you have experience using effective practice MLTs? You can use this in anything, Tim. Yes, you can say in professional practice, what are the issues that we're facing? And what would it mean? And what options do we have? And what are we going to do in professionalism? The subject doesn't matter. You can use it in any subject, at any level, at any time. Claire, are there any other things you want to comment on before we sign off? Anyone else? Monisha. So what doesn't mean ignoring the problem or making it someone else's? It means asking, what does it mean for you and for other people? Monisha, yes. So what does this mean for me? So what does this mean for Monisha? So what does this mean for us working together in a department? So what does it mean for the group that we work with? So what does this mean? Could this mean for the curriculum committee? So what could this mean for the new curriculum and the students? And so you can see it across multiple levels. And when you take meaning at multiple levels, it leads you to options of action in a much richer way. It's a wise, informed action. It's not just what, now what. The so what informs, if you like, gives form to, informs the action. So with that, I have to say, Mishan, good to see you. I'm sorry I didn't get to any of your questions. I will be doing another webinar a month from now and another blog in about 2 weeks on the birth of wicked issues and what we can do about them. So please read there's 3 blogs now. I think they're pretty clear. I want to thank you all, especially want to thank Claire McRae for being producer and being so kind and generous with her time, and thank AMEE for making this available for free for everyone. And it's recorded and will be available on the MedEdWorld website under Reflections. So you can share this, you can use it with other people, feel free. And I will put these slides there as well. I will put a PDF of the slides there as soon as in about an hour. So thank you all. And Claire, could you sign off for me?